Well, hello, James. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to have you on the Create Brave podcast today, particularly as you are so busy at the moment. Not only are you co-founder of Huel and chief nutritionist for this iconic global brand, but you have just brought out your very own book, Well Fed, which has only just launched, hasn't it, in January 2025. But I have somehow managed to annotate it to within an inch of its life, because it is so in depth, has so much information, and I think in a very straight talking way demystifies a lot of the, I'll say for now, nonsense that we get kind of thrown at us about nutrition. So I'm really, really interested to explore some of that with you, get your opinions on things, but also find a little bit more about the man behind Huel. So welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Claire. And I'm super impressed that you've not only read Well Fed in less than 2 weeks, but you've put a load of questions and post-it notes in it. That either means one of three things. One is you're a super quick reader. Secondly, you devote a lot of time to reading. Or thirdly, and I hope, it's such an engaging read that you can't put it down. So I'm hoping it's option three.
It's number three, James. Such an engaging read. No, but honestly, it is super interesting. And we'll get on to, I think, why that is particularly interesting for me and my my own experience of nutrition and what nutrition means for fueling my body. We'll get onto that later on, because I want to start with you. I want to let's get a little bit of background, because when I say to people, I've got James Collier coming on the podcast, he's the co-founder of Huel, and that's really a great headline. But when we first spoke, you were very adamant to me, Claire, I am not an entrepreneur, and there's much more to that story. So I wonder if you could just take us back to, well, where did it all begin for you, this interest in the world of nutrition?
I generally put down my interest in nutrition to two things. Firstly, when I was 8 years old, my mother was diagnosed with what I later found out at the time was terminal breast cancer. However, she survived another 11 years. Now, it was the first time I'd heard the C word when I was 8 years old. I mean, most kids don't, especially back in the 80s, didn't know what it meant. And I was told my mum had a lump on her breast and that it was, she'd have to have some medical treatment. Now, she survived so long for two reasons. One is excellent healthcare in the NHS, even back in the 80s, right, when this was 40 odd years ago, and things were harder. But also because she changed her lifestyle massively. She became more mindful, meditation, things that, are only just being adopted in the West these days. But also she changed her diet. She adopted a vegetarian diet, and with a very focus on what she ate. Now, Dad and me, we didn't have the vegetarian diets, but we did eat a lot more plant foods. But there was also a lot of discussion around nutrition and what good food is, around the dinner table especially. So no doubt those little cues were being infiltrated into my brain at that early age. Now, secondly, I was always a very skinny, weedy kid. I was bullied. I did go to a private school, so it probably wasn't as physical and as damaging as it could have otherwise been, but there was constant verbal put downs. And I know most teenagers are subject to this, but it seemed to affect me more than anyone. So when I was 16, my best friend was a couple of years older than me. He'd already been lifting weights, so he sort of got me into it, and I started going to a gym at 16 years old, and I haven't really stopped since. It was my sort of solace. Oh, I found something I like doing, and the people down here don't judge me. There's no negativity. They actually want to encourage me. This is a positive environment. Don't get me wrong. The gym scene, I've changed to some proper hardcore gyms over the years, and it can be quite an aggressive undercurrent, but it's kind of supportively aggressive, which I found really, really positive. And then when it was time to go to uni, I did quite well in my A-levels. I thought, should I go and do economics, the sort of sensible option? I did an A-level in economics. Or should I do nutrition? Now, I had done biology as one of my other A-levels. I thought, well, that's my passion. I'll go and do that. Turns out, years later, the actual sensible option was nutrition. I've made my career there. So I left uni, went and worked in the NHS as a clinical dietitian for 7 years, gained some brilliant experience. And then simultaneously for the last couple of years, I was doing freelance dietetics, seeing patients, and also doing other work like meal plans for care homes, seminars, writing, anything really that was in my skill set. And then I also, in that sort of last year, started a bodybuilding discussion forum called Muscle Talk that some people, even these days, still know. And it actually went really busy. You know, we were getting pretty big figures. This is before social media. So there was 2 of us running that. It took off, and it gave both of us an okay monthly income for quite a few years until social media came along, and ruined everything. So I put I put nutrition down, to my mum's ill health and my interest in the bodybuilding world.
Yeah. And what did bodybuilding do for you? Because, to look at you now, you couldn't really imagine James Collier being the scrawny kid, but that's how it was for you. And bodybuilding then became something that I guess kind of gave you confidence, gave you focus, and I guess you started to look at the way you fueled your body differently as well. So what were you doing during that period to get yourself as strong as possible? Were you really sensibly looking into certain diets, or were you getting carried away with fads? What was it like for you at that point?
Both. I was definitely
Right.
carried away with fat, especially in the supplements. Some of the supplements I took, and I actually allude to this at the opening of chapter 4 in Well Fed. I talk about my mum, because, although she was a massive positive influence, she did follow some very questionable things as well, things that I kind of fight against now. But obviously the net benefit was there. She was eating good food, and those habits sort of manifested into my behaviours too. But me, yeah, I followed definitely some faddy stuff. But I did eat good food as well.
Yeah.
I probably didn't do enough cardio. No, probably, but I didn't do enough cardio. I didn't want to waste my energy
Yeah.
on cardio. It was all about lifting heavy things and putting them down again. So that probably wasn't a good move. And I didn't start doing cardio until much, much later, like my 40s as a regular thing. I'm probably a stone less muscle than I was in my heyday now, but I'm a lot fitter. I actually feel the fittest I've ever felt. However, joints and injuries, that's a different matter. Always got little niggles going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it definitely helped me positively. I think Mum did question a few of the things I was doing, but I think she felt that it was a net benefit. Dad too. My dad's still very supportive today of everything I do. He's 80 now and is still in brilliant health. So hopefully Mum's habits, went to him as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, it was like, I think they were concerned at some things, but they thought, nevertheless, I'm getting plenty of exercise and I'm eating good food. That's a win.
Yeah. Yeah. And just that period, I guess, wasn't that easy. I know you were bodybuilding, you were working in the NHS, and then you were also working on the doors, weren't you?
Yeah.
And that feels to me like you're really putting a lot of challenge on yourself, because, I've heard you speak about, you'd go onto the wards, you'd be working on the wards, dealing with the day-to-day real challenges that, that people are facing in their daily lives, the really hardest of moments, and then going out and, dealing with a lot of drunk men with egos. And that's, that in itself sounds like you had a tough time of it.
Yeah, look, I sort of get recruited to work the doors from the gyms, because a lot of the other guys down there, and I thought, I can do this. And I was in the NHS, and let's be honest, they don't pay very well. So can I get a bit of supplement? And yeah, some good laughs on the doors. But there was, you have got, drunk people, and they are violent, and I'm not a fighter, but I was quite well built. But I was, say, Thursday night, I'd be, exactly as you said, I'd be working on the doors. You're chucking people out at, say, 11:30. This is when the pubs shut at normal times. And then they can't go to sleep straight away. So it's 12:30 by the time you're in bed and probably asleep. You're up at sort of 6:30 the next day. So you haven't had a full night's sleep, really. And on Friday morning, then at 9:00, I'm on the wards helping a little old lady with her sip feed, who's struggling to eat and happened to be very mild tempered. That's not good. And it did massively have adverse effects on my mental health. Didn't realise at the time I was full of ego, want to be this tough guy on the door. And but also wanted to be this empathetic guy to my patients. And also wanted to further my career. I was also quite career minded. And I was actually doing 3 jobs at the latter part, because I was also doing my freelance dietitian work.
Yeah. And freelance dietitian work, that's turned into something pretty massive, hasn't it? So
Yeah.
talk to me about how you went from freelance dietitian and graduate of nutrition to co-founder of this global, multi-million pound iconic brand.
Yeah, so during that period of Muscle Talk, I also did a few other things in the bodybuilding fitness world. Like I had a clothes brand. Bodybuilders have the tanning stuff before they go on stage. I was running a business involved in that as well. I was also promoting shows, but since before Muscle Talk until after my role in it, I was always had my freelance nutrition business, and as I explained the sort of things I was doing, and that was always giving me a bit of extra money, and it was some months to get a decent project. And then in June 2014, I got an email that was life changing from a guy called Julian Hearn, and anyone who follows Huel will know that Julian is the principal founder of Huel, and I'm the co-founder. And he contacted me with this great idea he had because he'd already made some money on his first business, which was he's a marketing whiz, and he was wanted to do something else. And when he was his sort of second stab at being an entrepreneur was doing sort of diet comparisons, and he put himself on these diets, and he was finding it such a hassle to make all the food apart from protein shakes. So now I know Julian like I do. I know in his very logical thinking, well, why can't we put everything into one shake? I'll go and find someone who can do this for me. He found someone, and together we developed the product. But it took us a year. I actually wrote the original recipe in probably a few weeks from June 2014, but it took us a year to find the right people to back us to make it and get it off the ground. So it was June 2015 we launched, and then Julian said, as we launched, will you be my co-founder? That was like a 1 second response. Yes, please. The other businesses weren't doing very well at the time. So, just to bring back to what you said at the intro, Claire, about the entrepreneur thing, right? Julian is an entrepreneur. He thinks outside the box. Okay. He came up with the ideas. I'm an executor. And I've had this debate with so many either podcast hosts, other entrepreneurs, business leaders, academics. I've even done an after dinner speech on why I'm not an entrepreneur, because one of the banks wanted me to do a speech to their younger generation, and they wanted an entrepreneur. And I said, I'm not. And I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? And they said, whatever you want. I said, well, there's my topic, isn't it? Why I'm not an entrepreneur. And I don't think, this is not me being coy or anything. It's just, I'm just generally not. I don't think like that. Someone else comes up with ideas and I can execute them. I'm not denying I don't have skills. I've got skills for sure. And they've been refined during my leadership journey. But Julian's an entrepreneur and I'm very much not. And neither of us are CEOs. We have another guy, another James, who is the CEO of Huel, who steers the ship and runs the business. So Julian is CMO, I'm Chief Sustainable Nutrition Officer, and then we have other leaders in the business as well.
So as Chief Sustainability and Nutrition Officer, and the person behind what goes into Huel, when you got that email and when you started to develop this product and this brand, and something in that email ignited an idea in you that said, yes, this is we've got something here. What was it that really motivated you, or who were you creating Huel for in your mind? Who was it for?
I was thinking at the time, I'm a human nutritionist, right? My sustainability knowledge back then was limited to the fact that climate change is probably something we should worry about, but I don't know anything about it. And that was it. So I was creating Huel for busy people who were making otherwise less favourable nutrition choices, giving them something cheap and convenient and nutritious in order to, well, I say, affordable at least, maybe not cheap for some people, but and then the sort of sustainability thing came in later when we were talking about, the fact that we are sustainable because everything's plant-based. What can we do? Let's look at the science. And excuse me, I've always been a bit of a science nerd. So I thought, well, I dug into some of the data and thought, wow, look at the impact of the food system it's having. And actually Huel can actually, along with many, many other technologies and ways of eating, can help address the many issues that we're confronted with today when it comes to our food system.
Yeah. And I want to go back to the book because there, like I said at the very beginning, that there is so much in it, and so much of it I feel like are concepts that I haven't read before. That there is a new way of thinking about nutrition in this book that is explained in a really simple way. And you've got what you're calling contemplative. I've said it wrong again, haven't I? Contemplative.
No, that's all.
Contemplative
Yeah.
nutrition. I don't know why I struggle with that word so much.
Maybe I could have come up with a simple term.
No, but that's what it is, isn't it? It's about really thinking about your food and what it is for your body. But can you just explain, because there's the 5 pillars, aren't there, to contemplative nutrition? And I know people need to read the book to really understand it, but if you could give us your perspective on that and where that's come from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want people to think about what they eat, but people don't want to think too much, otherwise they're not going to. Let me come back to that point. Okay, back in 2019, after looking at some of the data and being concerned about climate change, I changed my own diet. Now, I'd already eaten with a nutrition focus and obviously sports and muscle building performance focus. But I thought, well, actually, if the food choices I make are also impacting others in the environment, I need to address that too. And we know that meat-rich diets have a higher carbon footprint than plant-rich diets. But I also thought, well, I'm not wholly convinced by the vegan argument. That's something we can come back to if you wish. But we definitely should be reducing the amount of animal products we have. So I reduced my animal-derived calories to around about 10% of a weekly intake. Now, for perspective, the Western average is about 28 to 30%. So it's cutting it by about 2/3. You're still having animal products, which could be eggs, fish, meat, some dairy, but try and make the emphasis a lot greater on plants. But also, while I was looking at some of the information, I became increasingly concerned about some of the farming methods that animals are subjected to. It just made me feel quite uncomfortable. So I also tried to avoid intensively farmed red meat and poultry. That was in 2019. The pandemic came and I got bored, as did everyone, and I started a blog writing about a bunch of critical thinking stuff. But I thought I ought to include some information about this diet. What shall I call it? Well, I have to think about it. So I called it contemplative nutrition. It kind of came from the mindfulness movement, contemplative action, things like that. And it was just took me about 1 minute to come up with the term. And I wrote 3 essays and then got to February 2021. And I said to my wife, this is something here. I've got something here, but this isn't a bunch of essays. This is a book. So I started writing the book, thought I'd finished in July 22. So 15, 16 months. Then tried to find a publisher. Took me ages, there's a longer story there, but it wasn't until sort of April 2024 that I got a brilliant agent, KT Literary Agency, and she then within 5 weeks had me signed with HarperCollins, who were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. They've been so supportive. However, there's always a however. Yeah. I went to the office I'd already been signed up. I'd had a brilliant call with my editor, Julia, who was brilliant. But I went there and she'd printed off my manuscript and put a red mark through loads of it, including 3 full chapters. Now, it came out of there because I'd been told, the previous call, like I was an A-star student, we're going to sign me up. I came out there with a B-, could do better from teacher. And it was like, okay.
Oh, dear.
And bang went summer, right? Maybe I'm exaggerating. We did have some good holidays, but I was working long hours. I still had my Huel work, right? And I had to rewrite a lot of the book. But you know what? Julia was right. It's a better book for it. It's not that the information I had that was cut was bad. In fact, I'm going to reuse it at some point. It was off topic. It definitely was off topic. So, there is a lot more work to come, and some of it will get published on my Substack, where I publish my articles now. But yeah, we've got Well-Fed now there, which was a result of that. So contemplative eating. As I started writing the book, I thought, well, there's actually 4 pillars. The eating for our physical health and eating for our mental health would be better discussed separately. I know they interact. So they're the first 2 pillars. The third pillar is sustainable eating, and the fourth is ethics. Now, ethics is a subjective term. What you, Claire, deem as ethical, I might have a different opinion on. But I tried to articulate what I deem as ethical in the book in one chapter. Mm-hmm. But as I was about a quarter of the way through the book and writing these pillars, I thought, yeah, but we don't just eat food in isolation. We eat food with other people. And I looked at some of the science. There's actually really, really cool and interesting science about eating meals with others. So not the what we eat, but how we eat and who we eat with. So there's a whole, the fifth pillar is community and eating. Mm-hmm. Some of the really interesting science that surrounds that. And from things like just making better food choices because you're preparing food for other people, great, you can get that. But there's actually some neurotransmitters and hormones that are associated with positivity that are actually enhanced through the very act of sharing food.
Yeah, and I think that's what drew me to the whole concept of contemplative eating and nutrition. And it's something else that I wanted to talk to you about, because we are in a world, and particularly from my experience, which is where endurance sports and following runners, following athletes, following social media influencers who are usually pushing certain nutrition, certain types of nutrition, certain types of diet or certain products because of their own agenda, usually. We kind of, in this dichotomy where there is a lot of these singular absolutes being told to people like me about eat this, run faster, eat this, be stronger, don't eat this, you'll get fat, you'll be this, you'll be that. And then on the other side, contemplative nutrition, which is or the contemplative diet, which for me enables you to look at the full scope of what we eat and how we eat and takes into account all of those things, but without ever saying anything is absolute. And that's what I think was a refreshing part of the read. And I know that there's a whole page in your book where you call out the quacks, which I think is the kind of influencer quacks, and how to spot when these absolutes are leading you in the wrong direction. But at the moment, does it not feel like there is so much noise in that area that it's almost dangerous to talk about nutrition online, because there is just so much, I called it nonsense at the beginning, but it's almost dangerous.
A few things I want to come to there, Claire. So thank you for pointing that out. I think you've summarised what I'm trying to get at. And the key is the key point with the 5 pillars. I've kind of half answered your previous question of the why, but I haven't answered it fully, because there's even if you take some well-written books on foods by very credible authors who give some really good information, they're still only addressing one point at a time, like what we eat for our own health. And there's another book someone else has written on sustainable food systems, and then someone else has written about ethical farming systems. I've tried to marry them all together because you cannot think of these things in isolation. There's a reason why my job title is Chief Sustainable Nutrition Officer, because the term sustainable and nutrition shouldn't be thought of separately. Now we're in the 3rd decade of the 3rd millennium, because they are intrinsically tied together, and that's important. And that's what I'm trying to do here, talk about sustainable nutrition as part of contemplative nutrition. So you're thinking about multiple motivations of why we choose food at the same time. Now, that sounds really confusing, but what I've tried to do, at the end of each section, I've got little call-outs to make it simple. So it's a food theory book of the why, but ultimately people want to know what they can do. And it is all about what the individual can do to make better food choices. So I've got these call-outs at the end of each chapter and sometimes during the chapters. But in the final chapter, I've got the 20 key actionable takeaways where I've synthesized where there's a lot of cross, fiber comes into a couple of them. So why not just make it one? So they're quite easy. The next thing, but you've mentioned misinformation. You use the word quack. I just want to share something with your audience about the word quack. Where does it come from? It's actually a Dutch term from quacksalver, spelled KW, and I can't spell the rest. And that was, I think people it was the late 1800s or the early 1900s, where these people were spouting a load of rubbish in respect of medicine. But it's so much more fun to talk about them pretending they're ducks. People are quacks, right? So it actually doesn't relate to ducks at all, but it's much more fun, isn't it?
Yeah. What have I seen you do on one of your social posts where you literally had a little duck a bit?
Yeah, whenever someone's a quack, and there's a.
That's what I think. That's what I think of.
I've got a little meme where there's a very, very well-known French lady who spouts a load of rubbish, who's a quack. And whenever I put a quack up, I've got a picture of her sitting in her chair with a duck's head.
Yeah.
Flashes for 1 second. It's a lot of my videos if people want to go hunt from them. The ones that talk about misinformation, of course.
Yeah.
People can
Because
probably
you've
get
called
them.
misinformation more dangerous than politics.
Yeah. Okay. I've been
yeah.
cited of saying that. Okay. This is a big can of worms that I explore to some extent in Well Fed, but there's a whole
Yeah.
rabbit warren that I want to go down. I'm writing an essay at the moment
It's book
about.
two. It's book two, James.
It is, if HarperCollins will give me a deal. But in the meantime, I'm going to write some of the information that may go into book two in my Substack essays, because then other people can learn along the way, and I can refine my points, right?
Yeah.
And I can further them, and then when I piece them all together in another book. But it's about this misinformation, and it is absolutely linked to politics at the moment. The big, the carnivore movement is very much linked to the right wing populist movement at the moment, and there are a lot of analogies that I can draw, and I am drawing in this essay that I hope to write soon. I haven't had a chance to write for 3 weeks. So, there's more coming in that. But you spoke about fear-mongering and black and white thinking. And if there's one thing, just one thing that people take away from reading Well Fed, is just the actual acknowledgement that the food system is complex. It's not black and white. I want people to stop thinking in black and white. That's all they do. They just think, if they question everything they hear. So, you've got an audience listening to this episode now, and and if they're, the more astute, may be thinking, okay, why should we listen to this tattooed bald bloke in his 50s, all right? And if they're asking that question, that's a win for me.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's half the battle. They shouldn't just be listening to me, but they should have an open mind when they listen to everybody. Now, you mentioned the food fear-mongering and black and white thinking, and people who speak in absolutes on social media say you should eat this, or you shouldn't have that. They're very likely talking rubbish. If they're fear-mongering certain foods, again, in that way, it's very questionable content. If they use sort of technical terms like toxic or, excuse me, if they use technical terms like toxic or insulin or inflammation without really saying what they mean, that's probably very questionable. Now, the other one is, you mentioned that it might be trying to sell something. Are they transparent about their biases? We all have our biases. A lot of us are financially linked. I have an obvious one. I'm co-founder of Huel. I'm invested in that. There is literally nothing I can do about it. Even if I was to leave Huel tomorrow, have no more financial stake in it, I am still invested in it. I'm emotionally invested because I came up with the original formulas, and I've got an attachment to the brand because I love what we're doing. I can't get away from that. There's nothing I can do, but I can be transparent about it. If ever I mention Huel in my videos, I should, either in the text or in what I say, mention that. Well, I have to actually legally, to be honest, which is a good thing. But it should at least be in my bio, and so people know that I have biases. However, this is where I disagree from some of my academic friends and the other good content makers. I don't think there always has to be a financial link. I think a lot of it is having this messiah complex. Are they egged on by an audience that continually adorns them with praise?
Yeah.
Does their audience, does what they say truth track? Does their audience even care that what their favorite sage is saying care about truth itself? Probably not. So here's the one trait that people can look for someone who is very likely giving good information. Mm-hmm. If the content maker and the person talking is very nuanced, very vague, non-committal, they are very likely giving good information. A good content maker will be confidently unconfident. Unfortunately, society is set up, and there's a lot of evolutionary reasons behind this, that if you're confident and assertive with what you say, with conviction, you're rewarded for that. And the reward on social media is getting more followers. Yeah. If you're unconfident in what you say, you're not rewarded. In fact, it can work against you. So this is where you get content makers like Lane Norton or Mike Israetel, why I'm such big fans of them, because they somehow got it right. They can be nuanced, but they do it in such a confident way that they've got the conviction, so they're giving it good information. And they're two people that I recommend that people
I mean, I've just opened up to it because there's a section that I've underlined in your book. you know, it can be cool in certain camps to disagree with any mainstream view.
Yes.
And I think that is the essence of it, isn't it? You know, particularly when it comes to health information, and it seems to have worsened since the pandemic.
Yeah,
So
there's
these
a
polarizing opinions that, you know, may not even be grounded in any financial compensation. They may just be for the sake of having a strong enough opinion that's going to get virality, increase followers, create controversy. And it's extremely damaging and extremely dangerous. And that's why it's really important for me to, you know, talk to you, find out the story behind Well Fed, and to get your very nuanced experience and opinion on things that is grounded in your many years of research and scientific analysis of what optimal nutrition is. Although I know that optimal in itself is how do we define optimal?
I
What
open
is
that
optimal
chapter,
nutrition?
don't I open that
What is the
chapter
optimal
through.
diet?
Yeah, there is no such thing. And actually say, if you
Yeah.
want to slam the book shut and go and get a refund or whatever, that's
Yes.
fine.
Yeah.
I don't know what an optimal diet is, but I do know
Yeah.
what a bad diet is. And I think you
Yes.
do too. I think most of the audience will know what bad food is. But stop this black and white thinking. Look, you know, there's some very questionable content. Who should people listen to is the question they should ask. You mentioned about this fear of academia and science since the pandemic, because it was handled so badly that, you know, but it doesn't mean that by and large the information we're getting about the pandemic wasn't correct. But there's this whole populism that's happened, and I'm calling this concept nutrition populism, which is the next article I'm writing, because it's a fear of power, but who I deem as being an expert. So there's a mistrust of so-called experts, and we therefore decide ourselves who we think is an expert. And these are people speaking with conviction. So we've got people that are not experts being told they're experts. And we've got genuine academics going on social media platforms talking about things they're all over. So my friend, Professor Sarah Berry, she's been on Diary of a CEO the other day. And she's a genuine expert in seed oils, right? That's what she's been talking about for her career. And the amount of negativity she's getting, being told she's being paid off, you know, she's someone you should listen to. She's a very credible person, a content maker. Yet they'd rather go and listen to somebody who thinks they've read a scientific paper, and are giving misinformation. And this is the thing. You've got people like the Eddie Aboods of the world who actually dispute science at all. It's a pure zealot, right? But then you've got the Gary Breckers and the glucose goddesses of the world who have got a science background, and they will cite papers in what they say. But go on and read the paper. It says nothing of the sort of what they're saying. And this is what they don't do. They cherry pick, and worse, they even misrepresent. And this is why I'm almost more annoyed at the Gary Breckers and glucose goddesses of the world, because they do know better and they should know better. And there's enough good information they put out that makes them credible, stuff that I would obviously agree with. It's very frustrating, not just for me, but more important for the lay public.
Yeah. I feel I am on the receiving end of that information. Someone who is just striving to get information, usually in an accessible way, because I don't have a lot of time. So I'm looking to lean into where that information can be given to me so that I can be as healthy as possible, and I can fuel my body in the way to do the things that I want to do. And it is very frustrating. But I want to ask you something without getting either you or I cancelled, about James shrugs because he's like, cancel me, I don't care. Which is about the experience that you've had, where you've not fallen into either the carnivore or the vegan camp, and you've kind of had you've had mud thrown at you from both sides.
Yeah. It certainly comes from when I talk about things like saturated fat, right? Where I'm actually not in full agreement with the academics who I've just said are genuine experts on this.
Yeah.
And of course I am. So I'm a big fan of, obviously, research. So let's talk about saturated fat. Diets that are high in saturated fat are associated with a high risk of non-communicable diseases like heart diseases and strokes and cancers, etc., especially the cardiovascular diseases. But if you look at the way the process happens, I'm also not convinced they're the actual problem. Of course, they're calorie dense and nice, but so I'm not disputing that. But you've got to look at the science. But I'm not sure that we should be calling them out as on food labels. So I've done some videos before, and I've literally in the same video had hate, and that's the right word, thrown at me from the carnivore and paleo and ancestral types, and on one side, and the vegans on another. Now, obviously, I was talking about this, and I was in the Guardian the other week, made the front page, which was weird, and it sort of got quoted, and it's gone a bit viral. You know, I thought, well, I'd even talk about that in one of my videos myself. I do. Let's be honest now. I get a lot less negativity from the vegan side because I'm generally supported of Huel. It was just based on a few experiences. Usually, when I talk about meat-rich diets and the fact that I'm not convinced by the vegan argument, I get negativity. But a lot of the challenges I get from the vegan side is actually respectable challenge, respectably disagreeing with me. Some of my close friends and allies in this misinformation world are strong vegans, and we respectfully mildly disagree on these things, but we all agree we should be eating more plants, right? And this is where I think the vegans fall down, right? I can look. Let's just look at that. Let's look at the two diets. I can make an argument that we should be vegans based on science. I can also make an argument that we shouldn't be vegans based on science. Okay. When it comes to the carnivore, I can't make the argument that we should be carnivores. I can't make it. It falls down at the first hurdle, right? So this is why I'm pretty confident that we shouldn't follow a carnivore diet. We should be eating an omnivorous diet. But I can actually make a stronger point that we should be very much plant rich.
So that leads me on to asking you to explain adaptivores.
Okay. So the term adaptivore is a term that I've come up with. I'm not sure if I've invented the word. In fact, I don't think I have. But I certainly heard it a few years ago, and I've certainly tried to define it in the book. And this is chapter 9, my favourite chapter. This is the one I want academics to challenge me on, because I think I've got a lot more to say here. So what is an adaptivore? It would be an omnivore. So what's the difference? You know, omnivores can eat plants and animal matter. Well, an adaptivore can glean nutrition from a huge range of foods, like plant and animal matter, but also fungi and also microbial matter. And let me come back to that. But the adaptations have occurred at the level of the gene. It's in our evolution. At the level of the species, because there are certain other things our species can do to adapt. At the level of the individual and at the level of the social group. But also at the level of the microbiome, or the good bacteria in our gut. There's a lot that I can say on that. But very briefly, let's say there's someone born in Sri Lanka. They are given spicy foods from birth. They're adapted to that. The reason for that has been cultural, because high risk of pathogenic disease, so it protects the gut and also preserves the food and stops food poisoning and increases the shelf life of certain foods, which was an adaptation when food was hard to get. Now, just to use the other extreme, someone born in, say, North Norway, who doesn't have spicy food because food can be frozen and kept quite easily there. But you take a Norwegian adult who's never had spicy food and put them on a Sri Lankan diet. Within a meal, they're going to have troubles at both ends, let's say. Okay, so this is important. But that adaptation can happen if that Norwegian individual has a lot more spicy foods more regularly. They will adapt and be able to tolerate it. There might even be some advantages. Now, the adaptations are easier when you're younger, but there are cultural adaptations too. Let me give some examples of that very briefly. We know that let's take Central American breads like tortillas or hominy. So these are based on maize. Now, vitamin B3 deficiency, niacin is the vitamin B3, is known as pellagra. There used to be, to prevent that, they started processing, this was traditional processing thousands of years ago, processing the breads using lime water. Now, I mean lime, the mineral, not the fruit here. By putting the maize into lime water, which breaks down the tough husks. And if you can't digest the tough husks properly. And where's the vitamin B kept? In the husks. So if you're not breaking this down, then you're going to get vitamin B3. So through culture, this processing of bread has been an adaptation to help prevent pellagra. And that's important. There are numerous other examples. Some of them I cite in the book across history. Some of them a little bit more fun, like the advisor to the Roman emperors, Galenus, who during the Roman times said foods are hot, cold, dry or moist. They weren't literally hot or cold or dry or moist, but what he was doing was encouraging variety. Now, this were things like pear and Moroccan pigeon, or maybe sweet and sour, because the Roman Empire stretched quite far. And I also jokingly put it down to the modern ham and pineapple pizza, right?
Yeah.
Causes a lot of controversy. I'm not sure if actually is a Galena tradition, but so there are things like that that were built in just to promote variety. But some of these have actually then become have manifested in the gene. So let's look at lactase persistence. So humans are the only species who can digest milk from other species as adults. Now, but it's not every human can do that. In fact, only roughly 1/3 of humans can do that. And there is a gene that, I can't remember the name of the gene, but it is coded for the enzyme lactase that breaks down milk sugar lactose into, just breaks it down, that works in adults. Now, if you think about that, that doesn't just mean we can get the milk sugar. It means we can have milk, and milk's full of protein and minerals and vitamins and stuff as well. So there were so many other benefits from the fact of lactase persistence. But crucially, now we've been able to map the genome. Some individuals who can digest milk sugar haven't actually got the gene for lactase persistence, but they can still break down milk. That's interesting. And this is all recent findings. And that is because it appears that their microbiome has adapted to break down milk sugar. And these are some Eastern European populations. There's been some in Poland and Lithuania and that sort of area who have been identified as that. So that adaptation has happened at the level of the microbiome. And that's interesting because it was a survival advantage. And if you think about it as well, milk's quite hard to transport, but you can then make cheese or butter and you can transport it. So this is why a lot of pastoral populations around the world have been able to have lactase persistence. And it's interestingly enough, the mutation happened probably in more than one population at the similar sort of time in history. That showed that there was a huge advantage for it. And you can go into a lot more detail on that. So, this is why I'm saying we're adaptivores. Now, you could be thinking, okay, we can get our nutrition from a lot of foods. Isn't that working against us this day and age when we've got these high fat, sugary, salty foods, low in fiber? Maybe. Or is it? Because we've got a lot of really cool food technologies. Obviously, I talk about Huel, but that's based on food. We've got these cellular ag, the so-called lab-grown meat. Hate that term, but it describes it, which are literal identical copies to meat cells that we can create and add other nutritions to it. Then we've got certain GMO technologies. Now, I don't want to be too controversial. There's a whole conversation to be had on GMOs, but under the right regulations, and that's crucial, GMOs can address some of the problems with the food system. Then there's ultra processing, which I think you want to talk about in a moment. Ultra processing was seen as bad. Well, there are certain processing techniques that can address the food system. What about certain farming technologies? We need to change the farming system to modern forms of regenerative farming, but we don't need to get rid of all the intensive farming. We need some of that as well. Then what about using insects? That's interesting. What about vertical farming, so-called supermarkets? There are so many technologies that we can use. So maybe the fact that we're adaptivores could be the answer to us addressing the food system.
Yeah, and absolutely fascinating. I think that there's so many threads there that I almost kind of want to try and pull together in the sense of, yes, you mentioned processed and ultra processing food. You mentioned in the book about nutrition innovation. You're clearly a big advocate for innovating around the way that we eat, which is, I guess, the essence of adaptivores. Adaptivores is defining us as in a way that we can respond to innovation, and we also have the ability to innovate. So all of those things are kind of coming together. And then we have Huel, and and we alongside that we have this idea that ultra processed food has become a mainstream term for anything other than food that you dig out of the ground, I guess, that is then labelled as, really bad for you and you shouldn't eat it, and it's really bad. And you stay away from even using that term because it's so loaded when you kind of talk about Huel or when you. And do you think that terms like that are preventing this type of innovation that we need in order to answer the questions around the future of nutrition? And how does that impact the way that you feel about Huel and what Huel does and who it's for?
Great question. This comes up a lot, and I just want to give a little bit of perspective so people understand where I'm coming from before I answer your question. Bear with me. So the term ultra-processed food wasn't used until 2009. Then a paper was written, I think it was 2011, from a team out of the University of Sao Paulo led by Carlos Montenegro, who came up with this so-called NOVA categorization. Very briefly, there's a 4 categorization system. NOVA 1 are foods that are minimally processed. They might be cooked, chopped, cut, sliced, mixed together, but nothing else. Nova 2 are culinary ingredients, things like salt, spices, maybe sauces that you would put with food from 1 to make them into meals. Level 3 are things that are more traditionally processed, things like homemade bread, homemade cakes, homemade biscuits, pies, that use just a few ingredients relevant, and people that you could make them at home or at a local cake shop or something like that. Nova 4 are so-called ultra-processed foods. These would include ingredients that you probably couldn't buy at your normal shop. You'd have to go hunting for them, or your local supermarket. You wouldn't have them at home, and the way they're made would probably need to involve some sort of processing on a factory level. And that has everything in there. Now, this is a categorization system made with good intent, so that academia could look at food patterns. Now, I'm betting, Claire, that 5 or 6 years ago, you hadn't even heard the term ultra-processed food. If it hadn't registered with you.
Mm-hmm. No.
Now, it's a term that you'll hear 5 or 6 times a day. Mm-hmm. It's in regular parlance. Now, I'm quite annoyed at otherwise good academics going on high-level podcasts putting the term into everyday parlance. The term lacks a suitable definition. In fact, my academic peers and other nutritionists and dietitians would agree with me, it lacks a definition. In fact, certain academics, a guy called Michael Gibney, professor from one of the universities in Ireland, traced the term on papers that looked at ultra-processed food and found that it's different in each paper. And there's another label that people also put under the ultra-processed food. If a food's making a health claim or a nutrition claim on the packet, it's probably an ultra-processed food. But there's a lot of nuance there. So these colleagues that I absolutely respect will agree with me that the term lacks a definition, yet they'll go on and use it. Mm. Now, I don't like to use a term that I don't know the meaning of.
Yep.
So for me, we have a term that works. We've been using it since the 70s. It's called junk food. And the aficionados of ultra-processed food will say the beauty of the term ultra-processed food is there's been an attempt to define it, albeit an inconclusive one. But isn't it the nuance in language that makes language work? The term junk food has got a kind of a playfulness to it.
Yeah.
Junk food. Oh, I've eaten my good food. I'm going to have a bit of junk. I know I probably shouldn't, but it's okay. And I don't want to fearmonger any food. You know, that's important. So I think bring back junk food. Now, I mean the term junk food, but you get the point. I'm saying it's probably too far now. That language evolves and language happens, right? People are using it, but it's just really not helpful. Now, let's look at a few foods here. Let's look at Nestle shredded wheat, 100% whole wheat. Even if you're the biggest Nova fan, you're going to agree that's a Nova 3, not a Nova 4. Yet, what does it say on the pack? Healthy heart, 100% whole grain. Makes a bunch of nutrition claims and health claims. Okay, fallen down on the definition. Let's take baked beans. These would be a Nova 4, yet these are high fiber, nutritious foods. Weetabix is another one, would be a Nova 4. Some people say it's a Nova 3, but this is where the dispute comes in, right? It's got added ingredients that you can't get routinely. And it makes health claim. These are high fiber, nutritious gems. We should be encouraging them. And there are other examples as well. It works both ways. You go down your shop and you buy some crisps or potato chips for the American listeners here. You look at Walker's, Nova 4. You look at Kettle, lightly salted, Nova 3. Okay. Now, I don't know about you, but I can bang through several packets of Kettle chips. They are lovely. Okay. So they are, and you know, one of the other traits of Nova 4 ultra processed foods is the hyperpalatability. So I'd say Kettle lightly salted chips are hyperpalatable. So it falls down. What about your local fish and chips? Nova 3. Okay. So, and that's my favorite go-to food. Chips are lovely. It's my treat food, but I wouldn't say they're, something you should have a regular healthy staple every night of the week. So it falls down on both levels.
Yeah.
Junk food is better. Now, let's look at the research. For sure, the research is very clear that diets that are typically high in foods that fall under Nova 4, ultra-processed foods, are associated with a higher increased risk of non-communicable diseases. You can't get away from that, agree. But there was a paper in November 2023 in the Lancet that agreed with that, but then broke them down into subcategories. And you know what they found? They found that so-called ultra-processed high-fiber breads, wholemeal breads and granary breads, were associated with a lower risk of non-communicable disease, as there were with some of the meat alternatives. There was another study done last year where a bunch of researchers followed the healthy eating guidelines and managed to make diets that are 80% ultra-processed food was still were high fiber, low saturated fat, low fat, low salt, low sugar, and everything we should be doing. Okay. And there's been more recent research. In fact, there's one I've just heard about today. I haven't even read it yet. I've just heard someone talking about it. It calls into question the categorization system. And I think Carlos Montenegro and his team were full of good intentions to do this. I think it's other people that have carried on. I'm not criticizing the Nova team at all. I think they're doing a wonderful job. Now, there are other reasons as well. We're in a fibre crisis. According to the British Nutrition Foundation from 2021 stats, only 9% of UK adults are getting the recommended daily amount of fibre. And fibre does so many cool things for digestion, cardiovascular health, even cognition. It feeds our microbiome. Then, of course, sustainable diets, right? It's all very well saying going back to this ancestral eating of what we dig up, but it's such a privileged perspective to being able to do that. If you can afford to do that, good for you. But there's 8 billion people and rising to feed on this planet. And I like to quote the environmentalist Mark Linus at these times, who says, paraphrase him slightly, if we were to go back to traditional farming systems, circa 1960, we would need a plot the size of 2 South Americas in order to feed the planet. Now, obviously, that is probably slightly metaphorical here, right? And there's a lot more to it than that. Mm-hmm. But that's because we've got to look at the environmental impact as well. We know that meat-rich diets have an environmental impact. If we want to carry on eating meat the way we do, we need to change the farming systems. I'm not saying we shouldn't farm animals for meat. I can provide a strong argument we should carry on doing that. But I'm pretty confident we should be reducing the amount we do. I'm pretty confident a lot of the farming methods should change. Now, we live in the UK, and this is one thing we don't know how lucky we are. The actual farming methods are less bad in the UK than typical many other Western nations. We've actually got it quite good here. So a lot of the meat we have, we can probably whether the animals haven't gone through, it's a proper interpretation here, but I'm just trying to be for brevity, haven't gone through haven't been subjected to the cruelty that they have in other areas. Okay, the term cruelty is subjective, and can of worms there, can of vegan worms. So there's such a nuance here, but what I'm saying is we need to look at ultra processed foods. Now, of course, I'm aware of my bias that Huel would fall under Nova 4, but so what? Let's look at the data. People can't go out there and saying, oh, it's going to cause inflammation or increase insulin if they don't provide the data to back it up. And this is what people do with foods that don't fall into their ideology, or as the term, another word I invent in the book is dietology, a portmanteau of diet and ideology. And this is what we've got. So of course I've got my biases, but I see Huel, along with multiple other technologies, are part of the solution to the food system. And if Huel isn't for them, that's fine. But let's look at the other technologies. Please don't, the things that I'm not invested in. If people think I've got too much bias here, then that's cool. I don't get it. Now, if you're fortunate enough to be able to buy your food from local farm shops where you know the supply chain, and your meat is bought ethically, they've been farmed in certain ways, and you've got the money to do that, and the time to do that, and the ability to prepare food yourself, because there's another thing about privilege, right? A lot of people, don't have the skills to even cook a meal, and we shouldn't judge people on that. It's not their fault. They weren't brought up that way. Maybe they were brought up in a single parent family. Maybe they're a single parent now and they're working a couple of jobs. Don't judge other people. So calling people lazy, like some of these social media influencers do, is very judgmental and just frankly incorrect and pointless. So if you're privileged enough to be able to do this, great, but most people aren't. and we need to look at the way we buy food. So if we can get convenient ways of getting good protein, good fiber, and a range of vitamins and minerals and essential fats into people cheaply, conveniently, then we should absolutely use those. And I've yet to hear anybody provide an argument that would disagree with that. That's provide an argument that's sufficiently strong that would disagree with that. But I'm open to debate anyone.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really, in the conversations I've had with you, you are someone who is open to debate, to challenge, to the understanding of nuance, and that is very rare to find in this space. And that's why I think it's so fascinating to talk to you, not least because you have such a huge amount of knowledge. And I want to just end on one last question, which is a tough question, but I'll ask it anyway. And it really is about what's next. So what's next, I guess, for you within this space? What's the kind of one thing that you think that one thing is very difficult? We're not allowed to speak in absolutes, are we? But if there was one thing or one message that you could platform through writing the book or through kind of putting out into the world that's really important for the future of our population, what would it be? And I'm sorry that isn't asking you an absolute question, because there is so many layers that we could go through. But
then I'll answer it with a non-absolute. I'll answer it. I want people to embrace complexity. Try to stop thinking in black and white. Listen to other people, but weigh up in a Bayesian perspective. And by Bayesianism, I mean whether we look at the amount of evidence you've got in your knowledge base at the time and see how credible it is. But think like a Bayesian, and it's worth people Googling that term for 1 minute. Just embrace nuance, embrace complexity, and stop polarizing. Just listen to other people. We've got this, in the words of the journalist Tim Urban, we're on low rung thinking. He talks about high rung thinking. You can have different opinions from the left and the right. In the days of Reagan, right, while I might have disagreed with a lot of what he said now, he was a high rung thinker. He was about embracing other opinions. We are societal. We need to embrace other people's opinions where we are not individuals. We are bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, James, thank you so much. That's a really kind of powerful last message. And I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your extremely busy schedule at the moment while you are talking to so many people about the book, talking about Well Fed, and going on this quite exciting journey now with your book launch. I feel like there will be at least another book coming from you very soon.
Maybe.
Because,
no plan. I'm just going with the flow at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's fantastic. As you can see, it's been a real eye-opener for me, and I really recommend people kind of digging into that and understanding the nuance of it, so that they can then go out into the world and consume the social media and the messages and the absolutes that are kind of put into us, but with that complexity and that final message that you've given, which is really important. James, thanks so much for coming on to Create Brave. I am very honoured to have had you on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire. Enjoyed the conversation.